No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He
you
a
can't put it up
legend.
later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we're joined by Jskelts. We're going to go through a bunch of betting stuff for Worlds. We're going to talk about all the different regions, the different bets that we like, power rank some of the teams, and things like that. Alex, what's going on?
Not too much, man. I'm excited to get back into it. I took a bit of a low volume split, and then when the Worlds is coming up, I'm excited for it. Let's do it.
Perfect. So I think I may have talked about some of this stuff in a previous video for like the play-in stage, but let's start with the play-in stage. So in Group A, we have EG, Fnatic, Beyond Gaming. I think those are the real teams that have a chance to win this group, right? What other teams are you thinking from this group?
Honestly, not a ton. I think EG and Fnatic should be the most likely by a decent amount. Probably 60% of the time one of those guys wins the group.
Yeah, and then obviously today we got some information about Fnatic. They have like a COVID situation right now, so apparently Fnatic's bot lane has COVID, so Upset and Hillsong, arguably their most important players. That's going to be a problem. One person on YouTube sent me like 3 or 4 comments about Chiefs Esports Club, so he's really high on Chiefs Esports Club. I don't even know what their odds are to win Group A. Let me take a look at that real quick. But
I have them at 9% for what it's worth.
9%.
Something.
Okay, yeah. So Bet365 doesn't even have that up anymore, so they must have got hit by somebody. But those are the kinds of things that I love about Worlds. Like Beyond Gaming, we've seen they have some players that have done okay in other tournaments, and they've qualified for other tournaments in the past. Chiefs, I don't know anything about them, but apparently they've played well. So they have Raze, Tally, who are players we're somewhat familiar with. I think Tophoon we've seen before. Aladoric, I think we've seen at international competitions. And Arthur, I feel like I've seen a jungler named Arthur, but I don't really remember much about him. Detonation Focus Me is apparently over the hill, which they kind of were already over the hill last year, and I think they have most of the same roster. EG, the Danny news. Danny's not going to be playing at Worlds. That's super sad and unfortunate. Obviously, he's going through a lot of difficult stuff right now. And Alex and I were talking about this before the video. It might actually be the best thing for Evil Geniuses in terms of being competitive at this tournament, because Danny's impact on the team like warped draft so much, and it made it so much less common. Like all their drafts are just so much different than a lot of other teams' drafts. So maybe by taking away their shiny toy, they get rid of the fancy play syndrome, and they can just be more straightforward. And then last but not least, their coach is horrible. I think Rigby is one of the worst coaches in the out of the good teams in the LCS. Like, his drafting is horrible, and I think the only reason why EG made it as far as they did is because Inspired is out of control. Jojo Pyun is obviously going to be very good for a long time. And that's basically it for this group. If I were making bets on this group, I would definitely be comfortable putting money on EG. And I would take a shot on Chiefs just because that guy from YouTube. That's the kind of stuff that I'm fine with. He had like a bunch of comments about it, and it seems like he's very like plugged into what's going on, and I respect that. So just because of him, I think I might take a shot on Chiefs.
Yeah, totally fair. I don't have anywhere I can bet on like play-in winners or qualifiers, which kind of sucks. But I do remember 2 years ago at MSI, Pentanet I think qualified and won me a bunch of money. So big fan of the US boys. No qualms with firing, something on Chiefs, assuming it's at least close to 9% or whatever.
Yeah. So that guy was Ryan Lang. Ryan Lang, shout out to you. You're wild. In Group B, we have DRX, Istanbul Wildcats, Isurus, Mad Lions, RNG, Saigon Buffalo. If there was a way for me to bet on Mad Lions not making out of this, I would totally do that because I just don't like Mad Lions in general. I think that DRX should easily qualify. RNG should easily qualify. Saigon Buffalo is interesting, but it's very unlikely, I think, that they are one of the top 2 seeds coming out of this. The one sad thing is that whoever is the 2nd seed in Group A is going to probably... Wait, no, I'm sorry. Whoever wins the elimination round from Group A is going to get slapped by DRX or RNG. That just seems kind of unlucky to me. What do you think about Group B? Do you have any bets for Group B?
Yeah, nothing really. I have Royal to make it out 80 or to win 87% of the time. I think they're just in this. I think they're just a tier above all the other teams in this group. I don't think. I don't actually have DRX as being that strong, but they're kind of in that mix with everyone else of the good teams besides RNG in this group.
Yeah, so I think that DRX is going to prove to be a lot stronger than people think they are because they look not as strong when they're playing against Korean teams and losing to teams like T1, Sandbox, Genji, and like Damwon. It just makes them look a little bit worse because it was more competitive than people thought it was going to be in Korea this year. But when they're going up against Mad Lions, Istanbul Wildcats, Saigon Buffalo, Isurus, they're going to look like unstoppable, and they're going to go into the next round of this competition at full strength. I think Kingen is okay but not great. Piosik, I think, is one of the better junglers in the world. He's just kind of hamstrung by how his team plays. Zika is a very good mid laner. I think that by the time we get through with this tournament, Piosik or Zika are going to be like one of the hyped new players where going into next season's LCK, they're going to be like one of the top players. Deft has lost a step, but he's still Deft. And then Beryl is a very good support. The one problem that I have is that Juhan gets some time from Piosik. I think that a lot of that has to do with champion pool. And in the qualification tournament to get here, I think Juhan was actually in for the deciding game. So unless the meta shifts, Piosik might get split playing time, which does concern me. But there's nothing I can really do to change my thoughts on DRX in general. Are there any matchups in particular that you like the dogs in during the play-ins, like spots that you want to take shots on?
Let's see. I haven't done much of handicapping the opening rounds in terms of matchups, but I always have a ton of respect for the Vietnamese teams. I think they always show up incredibly strong. I don't know what their visa situation is, if they got their full roster there again.
Mm-hmm.
Wildcats have looked okay. Isurus, I mean, these teams can surprise. There's no bad teams at Worlds. All of these teams are good and capable, and if you give them a lead, I bet they can finish the game. I'm probably a bit higher on Mad Lions than you are, just because they're from the European region. They have some good players, but I think to me it's just kind of RNG, and then you can probably DRX, Mad Lions, maybe Saigon Buffalo compete for that second spot.
Yeah. So just looking at the bets from the first and second days of play, or the first couple days of play, I'm just going to go through them pretty quick. DRX against RNG. I like DRX as an underdog. I think RNG is one of the best teams at the tournament, and I'm not trying to say that they're going to be bad in general, but DRX is strong enough to beat RNG in a best of one. Saigon Buffalo... No, Chiefs Esports Club against Detonation Focus Me as a plus 125 dog. Give me that. Beyond Gaming as a plus 175 dog against Evil Geniuses. Give me that. Because those are the kinds of spots where, if Danny not being on the team is going to make them much worse, then a team like Beyond Gaming, I think, could actually beat Evil Geniuses. I want Evil Geniuses to win, so this is also kind of an emotional hedge. Saigon Buffalo against DRX. That's a spot where playstyles might actually let Saigon Buffalo get an early game lead and snowball it into a win. I'm not playing Mad Lions against RNG. Saigon Buffalo against Mad Lions. Give me that. Beyond Gaming as a short favorite against Detonation Focus Me. I think Detonation Focus Me is going to be surprisingly bad. Chiefs against Evil Geniuses. I would maybe take a shot on that at plus 225. I want to get money in on these dogs before the first day of play, because that's when people's opinions of these teams is going to change the most wildly.
I mean, it's day one of best of ones, and we've had quite a long break since splits have ended. You don't really know what the meta is going to be. You don't really know what scrims are going like. There's always some surprises, and so I definitely think, like, especially in best of ones, I think paying attention to drafts, like, if you can get a read on like what's strong, you can have a huge edge in terms of like what side is advantageous, what people are really keyed into, that kind of stuff. So I'm down for that, and definitely like a lot of these underdogs that you're mentioning, I think would be sharp.
I think that so group qualification. So does that mean that Saigon Buffalo would need to come in between second to fourth, beat DRX or RNG, and then move on? Or is this like groups qualification in play-ins getting them into the next round? Because they're at minus 150. That's not worth it. What am I talking about? That's not worth it. Let's move on to the region of the winner. Who do you think is going? What region do you think is going to win Worlds this year?
I definitely think, well, very likely going to be China. I think that the only LCK team that I feel like there's 5 good teams that have a reasonable shot of winning this whole thing, and Genji's the only one from outside of China that could do that. So if I had to put money, and if I'm going to put money, which I will, it's probably going to be an LPL team.
Okay, and then what about in terms of groups? Which group do you think has the best chance of winning Worlds?
Let's take a look.
And I'll bring up the groups on in the main event as well, because that's how this is determined. So Group A, I'll read through them all real quick. Group A has Cloud9, T1, EDG. Group B, JDG, G2, Damwon. Group C, Rogue, Top Esports, GAM. Group D, Genji, 100 Thieves, CTBC, Flying Oyster. And they'll most likely, I think Group D is most likely to get an LPL team thrown into this group, right? Yeah.
They don't put the play-in team, assuming that rule is still in place. They like tend to not put teams with the same region in the same group. So I think Group D is very likely to get RNG. And honestly, for that reason, I might. Yeah, it's either. Honestly, it's very close between Group D and Group C.
Yeah.
Just with Top Esports and Rogue could maybe make a miracle run. JD Gaming, like, I have them as like maybe 0.5% lower than Top Esports. I mean, it's basically any group but A, I think I would bet on. I think they all have pretty equal chances. And I'm just very low on both Cloud9 and T1. And then EDG, it's the weakest LPL team. So I know it's kind of a cop-out that I think there's 3 groups that have very similar odds, but that's just kind of how it shakes out.
Yeah, I have it as Group C. There's also Group C winner. If you want to bet Genji, JDG, Top Esports, bet winners group instead, because I think that the numbers were pretty similar when I first looked at it. I don't know if that's still true. The region of winner, I originally saw it at plus 130 for LCK. I think the LCK is still underrated in general. This was actually, I think, a down year for the LPL, and I think it's going to be a good year for the LCK again. I think that there's like probably between 8 to 12 teams. Like, if you created a super league between the LPL and the LCK, I think that there are probably 5 teams from the LCK that are good enough to be competitive with the top like 8 to 10 teams in the LPL, and it'd be a much better League of Legends in general. And then win Group C, any play-in. So there was a bet previously where you could bet on the play-in team to win Group C. I kind of liked that just because it requires it would be like DRX basically getting into that group, beating up on Rogue, splitting Top Esports, and Top Esports drops a game to somebody else. I kind of liked that one. But that's basically it for that. So let's talk about our top team from each region. Let's go with North America first. Do you have individual lines for this still?
Yeah, I can pull them up.
Okay.
So yeah, essentially you should check with your sportsbook if you're going to bet one of these lines. How this works, if both teams, you're essentially betting on which team advances the farthest in the tournament, and if they get eliminated in the same stage, it's got to make sure it's a push and you don't lose the bet. But in terms of North American teams, the LCS, I see Cloud9 at evens. I see 100 Thieves at plus 200 and EG at plus 200. Um, I have them all getting eliminated at the same stage about 60% of the time. So, whether that's all in groups or all in, the first round or whatever. Um, and then from there, I have very similar splits, like 14% of the time EG, 13% of the time Cloud9, and then 30% of the time 100 Thieves. So, um, I don't really think I'm going to be betting an LCS team to make it the farthest, but um, yeah, interested to see if you disagree.
Yeah, I think that 100 Thieves are going to get exposed again at this tournament. I think it's unlikely they get out of Group D because they're going to have to deal with RNG probably and Genji. I think that C9 is very interesting. But I also think that it's very unlikely they get out of the group. I think it's unlikely that any of the North American teams get out of the group. The only way that a team does get out is if one of the narratives about the North American teams ends up being true. So I'm not 100% sure where Evil Geniuses could get, which group they could get into besides Group B. I think they'll most likely end up in Group B. But if they got into Group C, I think that actually gives them the best chance to get out, because all they'd have to do is beat Rogue. If they go into Group B, they'd have to beat two teams out of JDG, Dom1, and G2, which they didn't do great against G2 last time. But again, this is kind of where the whole Danny maybe not being in the roster, or not going to be in the roster, kind of improves their chances, because they can be more straightforward against a team like G2. But I think the narrative that kind of makes the most sense in my brain is like Berserker actually being good. So if Berserker is actually a difference maker in the bot lane, and like you have the whole T1 Academy player coming back and beating T1 like at Worlds, like that'd be a pretty cool story. I think Blabber is playing really well right now. I think Fudge is playing really well right now. I think that their weakness is Jensen, and Jensen will most likely just play control mages, and it'll put the onus on players like Faker and Scout to kind of play more aggressive champions, which they don't really do. So stylistically, I think Cloud9 is actually in a pretty good group for that. But with the extra value at plus 200 on EG, if I was going to make a bet on top LCS team, it would be EG.
Yeah,
for sure.
I have that one as like kind of break even. So if you have a strong read that EG is actually not hurt that much by the Danny news, then and the Fnatic news kind of inadvertently helps them in that they're in the same play-in groups. So
exactly.
If you like flipping coins, or if you think EG is actually pretty good, then I think that's like a worthwhile bet. I'm not going to fire it, but I think it's worth considering at least.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing that do you have any Group C lines in particular, like Rogue qualifying out of Group C? Like, could you see some kind of way to try to not middle? Would it be plus EV to bet Rogue to advance out of the group stage, and also EG to be the top performing LCS team, because all it takes is one of them to kind of get out of Group C? You know what I mean? If you bet Rogue and EG together.
I mean, they're kind of inversely correlated, right? Because if you want one to happen, then the other is less likely to happen. I haven't run the numbers on how often both of them happen.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of value in if you think about the LEC one, which is the top LEC team. I think there's a lot of value in the Rogue line at plus 225. I think they have a real shot to advance.
What are could you give us the four numbers? Because on mine I don't have the top LEC team.
Yeah, sure. So I have Rogue at plus 225, G2 at also plus 225, Fnatic plus 250, and Mad Lions at plus 350. I just sent you a screenshot of that as well.
Okay.
And so, getting a little more than 2-1 on your money. Rogue, I have as the best European team, and I think they're in a group that they can make it out of. And I think G2 could also make it out of their group, depending on where Fnatic gets placed. They could possibly make it out. These things can happen, but I actually think Rogue, pretty strong bet. So I'm definitely down for that. Let's see. How often do I actually have them? So I have them making it the farthest 25% of the time. But then, there's a push. Let's see.
A ridiculous amount of the time.
Yeah, about 38% of the time. So you win about 25% of the time, and then you get your money back 38% of the time at plus 225. I'm in for that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why I think that maybe betting Rogue and EG together makes a little bit more sense, because I think the percent of the time that all the North American teams get eliminated in the group stage, like, will make you push that Evil Geniuses bet a lot of the time, but it's also a hedge against Rogue going sideways. You know what I mean? Because one of them will most likely get out of there. Like, Gam beating them just doesn't seem like, it's just very unlikely from a regional strength perspective.
I mean, Gigabyte Marines have definitely popped off before, but I see what you're saying. I just think they are inversely correlated. Like, if you wanted to bet on one and then like C9 to advance, that would, or C9 to be the best one, then I think that would make a lot of sense, because if one hits, or if, like, you know, if the Rogue one hits, right, then they've probably eliminated a North American team in process, and then you're much more likely to win the other one.
Yeah.
So I think that angle might be a bit more plus EV, but I don't have the specific numbers in terms of how often one happens versus the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are some like highest KDA lines. I'm not playing any of those on Bet365. That seems kind of insane to me. Numbers of Barons, numbers of Dragons. I'm not doing anything like that. Let's talk about let's go to the next one. So LCK, top LCK team.
Yeah, I think this might be my favorite bet of the tournament, or second. This is my second favorite bet of the tournament. Gen G to be the top LCK team in the tournament. Kind of when looking at, just giving a grade to team strengths, I kind of have Gen G as like a tier of their own in terms of the LCK.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have -111 in terms of top LCK team. I am not that high on T1, Damwon, or DRX, and I just think that Gen G very likely to be the top LCK team, so I'm definitely in on that one. Let's see how often. I have them as the top team about, I think, 44% of the time. So, yeah, 45% of the time, and then you push 28% of the time at -110. I'm in for that.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think part of the reason why that's happening is, I guess, Group B on the surface looks kind of scary to the books in terms of the lines that they're posting. And then Group D, I mean, Gen G's going to advance. T1 will most likely advance. Damwon will most likely advance. I guess the question is, does DRX get out? Because wouldn't the big problem with this kind of bet at, what was your line at? -200?
-110.
-110. Okay, this one got bet all the way to -200 on Bet365. So
yeah, I'm a fan of this one.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. I think that just seeing it at -200 obviously makes it much more difficult. I think that I would rather have Damwon and DRX in terms of, like, generally when I'm putting out money on the sports books for like League of Legends, I want the larger odds just in general, because like a team like Gen G, I was high on them last year going into Worlds because I thought that stylistically they were one of the two best 80 carry focused teams in the world. I think that if that is not the case, I think that'll probably be problematic for Gen G, because Doran isn't the best, Peanut is a high volatility jungler, and Chovy is obviously a very good mid laner. But I think that could end up being a pretty big weakness for Gen G if it's just topside focused for a majority of the tournament. So because, like, if we get Ruler forced onto like utility 80 carries instead of being a hard carry player, which is, I think, part of the reason why they were so successful at last year's Worlds, that would kind of eat into a lot of their win probability, I think. And then also the probably the better angle to kind of push back against betting this at -200 would be the draw for the knockout round. Like, all it takes is Gen G having the hardest matchup out of any of these teams in the knockout round to just kind of like flipping this bet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let me see what it is if I put in -200 here. Yeah, then it's -EV. I wouldn't take it at -200. I think that's not a good bet.
Okay.
But yeah, also, so I mean, every single time, like when you make a bet, it just comes down to how often you think it's going to happen and what's the price you're being given.
Yeah.
And so -110, like, I have maxed this on Bet Online, like if I can get more money down, I might, because like one, if other books are showing, I think I can't. I like Bovada has minus 170, and I think your book has minus 200. Like minus
Yeah.
110 is clearly a misprice.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
I think just let's see, looking at um, just looking at other leagues. So like picks and bans in EU Masters right now, the number one ban is Callista. The top two picks for AD carry are Sivir, Aphelios, Zeri, Lucian, Callista. Like I don't think this is going to be a supportive AD carry meta if you want to go from that. And so I don't really pay attention to like champion picks or meta. I just kind of like good teams are going to find ways to win games and like they'll show up on the stats sheet. But even from that angle, I think like Rua is going to be fine and they'll find a way to make him like the focal point of this team. So
Yeah.
just both from a price standpoint and from like a meta standpoint, I'm totally on board with this. I'm very comfortable with this bet.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing would be, just for this one specifically, Gen G is like Gen G having to play against top esports or JDG in the next round. That happens more often than Dom1 or DRX playing one of those two teams in the first round of the knockouts, right?
Yeah. So it definitely happens. Like, what did so okay, they advance the farthest less than half the time, but it's kind of just about that push equity that you get. And so
Okay, sure.
and like yeah, so half from reading the rules how this works is I think this is just how it's always worked, but maybe I'm like the first seeds are then like randomly picked against the second seeds in the next round, and so Gen G getting the first seed would be pretty huge, so that they can avoid both top and JDG, which I have as like the most likely ones. And then there's a lot of kind of second seeds that just end up being, I have them graded as kind of like just weaker teams, like in a tier below these top elite teams. So,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. Like they're like you can get screwed over, and like they drop a few games and they end up second, and then they play top esports in the next round and they lose. That can definitely happen. I'm not saying this is like gonna happen. Like it's not a lock, right? More than half the time they're not gonna advance the farthest, but I'm just comfortable. Like the price I'm being given. It's just kind of too good to ignore. But like minus 200 is not good enough, but if you can find minus 110, definitely just go off.
Yeah. So let's go to the LPL then. So for the LPL, we have JDG at plus 150, Top Esports at plus 162, EDG at plus 450, and RNG at plus 550. I think that RNG at plus 550 as the top LPL team is probably the best bet that I've seen so far. I think that RNG at MSI, having been and going to Breathe, is kind of a crazy benefit to them. I think that Breathe is one of the best top laners in the world. There are certain kinds of top laners that I just prefer. Like Kana last year was playing out of his mind, but then he goes to Nongshim and they suck. So like there's not much that you can do about that if you're a top laner. You don't have as much impact as a lot of other roles. But with RNG, it's like Breathe is one of the best. Wei is not a very good jungler, so that's a big problem. Xiaohu, if this is a roaming mid laner meta, then that's going to be very good for him, but he's also good at other types of metas, so he's not necessarily drawing dead if it's not a roaming mid meta. And then you have Gala, who is just the most run good AD carry in the world because his team force feeds him, and then everybody's like, oh my god, he got a pentakill, he must be the best player in the world. And then like he's just kind of doesn't show up against a lot of the actual good AD carries, but he always has a chance to pop off, and like that's kind of how RNG plays, just to like give him the kills. And Ming's obviously a very good support. So like I've been rooting against RNG for a very long time, just in general, but right when they got Breathe, I was thinking to myself, like, I hope that they make it to Worlds. I hope that this team can actually win the World Championship, because it'll kind of give credence to the idea that Breathe is very good, but then I'll also have to deal with people saying that Gala is the best AD carry in the world because he won a World Championship. So I'm very conflicted about it, but I think that plus 550 is an insane number to get them as the top LPL team. So I will certainly have money on that before the tournament starts.
Yeah, I have that as slightly plus EV, so I have it at like a 3% ROI. Generally, at that level, I'm kind of like, do I like there's always some kind of acknowledgement that like whatever your model spits out, if it's plus EV, it's probably closer to neutral EV than you think. So like I might fire that one, I might not. But if I was gonna fire an LPL one, I would take RNG at plus 550.
Yeah.
And the Gala thing is weird. Like I have always not thought he was the best AD carry, but like I am willing. Like I might have to take the L. Like he's not. He hasn't faltered, right? Like it's just always kind of come up his meta when it's time for Worlds and MSI to roll around.
Yeah.
He's always performed. Yeah, I mean, what else can he like? I don't know what more you can ask from the guy than 2 MSI titles and like in a Kaisa meta. Like it's always kind of just come up for him.
Yeah.
You know, this might not be his meta, but we'll find out. You know.
Yeah, you can only play the games that you're put into, and like if his team is drafting
Exactly.
around him and plays that way, like obviously, you know, they like him enough to do that. So that is fair. All right, so let's talk about T1 because we really haven't talked about T1 very much going into this. All started off because, you know, I think we have slightly different opinions on this. I think that the draw is great for T1. Obviously, they're in probably the weakest group.
Yep.
I think that Cloud9. I honestly do think that the LCS will outperform expectations this year, either by being hyper competitive in the group stage, or by like actually advancing relatively far. The ways that can happen is either Cloud9 is very good or EG is very good. Like if Inspired just plays out of his mind, I do think Inspired is one of the better junglers at this tournament. Definitely undervalued in general.
For sure.
And then the Kaori thing needs to break right. But for Cloud9, the whole Berserker angle, like I mentioned before, it's a little bit more scary because of a team like T1 that I think is going to be a good matchup against Cloud9, not only from a talent perspective, but a playstyle perspective. So I think Zeus has gotten a little overrated at this point. Like if I was fielding a team for a tournament tomorrow, I think that I'd still rather have Kana because what he was able to do last year, I think does kind of outshine what Zeus has been able to do. Because stylistically, T1 has kind of moved their entire identity into this earlier game meta, or earlier game team style that at the same time gives up a bunch of dragons. Like they have the worst, just from like watching games, the way that they treat dragon just blows my mind because they just like they don't care about it, and they're like, oh, all the gold that we accrue in the early game is going to outweigh whatever dragon advantage the other team has, and we could always try to fight them at Dragon Soul. But the number of times they just lose that like all important fight just kind of blows my mind. I think that Gumayusi has like public consensus has really dipped on him since the spring going into MSI. Everybody thought he was going to be the best AD carry in the world by far, go to Worlds, dominate Worlds, and then just crown T1 the champions. But that really hasn't been the case. I think it's funny that we've gone so far away from that though, because now he's not even talked about as one of the top 4 or 5 AD carries at this tournament. I think that Viper and Ruler are definitely better than him, but I think that Gumayusi can still make a good argument for being the 3rd or 4th best AD carry at the tournament with high upside. That's really where this team needs to kind of pivot, is let Keria be the best support in the world, like he is, and then don't draft for early game. So that's part of the reason why I like T1, because the fix in my mind just seems so simple. But it's also what scares me, is because if I have a completely different read on the meta or the way that you should approach the draft and the game in general, then I'll never see eye to eye with the T1 coaching staff, because I can't make sense of the way that they draft or approach the early game a lot of the time, especially when they're in a match against a team like Gen G, where Gen G will most likely not let you stomp them in the early game, so why are you drafting for it? Those are the kinds of things that scare me about T1, which I think is a pretty good segue into your opinions on T1.
Yeah, it's kind of funny as someone that I don't think I watched a single T1 game this last split. And like I remember at MSI, everyone was talking about how they might be the best League of Legends team ever. And it was so funny because the previous split, so 2022 spring, I had just like bet against them the whole way. Like I just didn't see it, you know, kind of like just looking at their numbers and like how they were in these games, these kinds of things that they ended up winning. You know, I kind of bet against it, and then they just like went 17-0 or something, like, and like I lost every time, right? But I think there's also, and then at MSI, I finally got to bet against them, and they finally lost in the finals. That was great. I think this is like year 5 or year 4 of me just betting against T1 at international tournaments. I don't have them ranked very strong. obviously I haven't watched the games, but just the statistics that seem to matter in terms of winning games, they are just not doing that well as compared to these other strong teams. So I'm kind of out on them. I don't really think they have a realistic shot at winning Worlds, unless they do, in which case we'll delete this video. But that's I just consider them kind of like they're stronger than C9 for sure, but I think they're weaker than EDG, and I think that they're extremely likely to make it out of the group just because of like their competition. But in terms of winning Worlds or making the finals, I mean, just sitting it based on my numbers, I struggle to see it.
Yeah. I think if we look at the T1 against EDG matchup specifically, I think that I would prefer T1. I think that obviously the Viper advantage is pretty big, but I think T1 is just as good, if not better, in all the other roles. Which would be kind of that's kind of the angle you need to believe in to believe in T1's chances to go pretty far.
Yeah, I have some weird quirks about this group. So, Bet Online, EDG is plus 100 to win this group. Pinnacle, they're minus 125. And then Bovada, if you have it, they're plus 125. So you kind of have you can very easily arb this group if you have access to multiple books. So I encourage anybody that does have access to, especially Bovada, to do so because they are. I would love EDG at plus 125. So definitely shop around if you have the option.
All right, so let's talk about your top 5 teams. So let's go from 5 to 1, and then just give me whatever like ancillary information you want to give me about the teams that you have.
Sure. All right, so number 5, I have EDG. Just coming in, a Chinese team is always going to rate out strong. In terms of their group, they have a pretty favorable group. We just talked about T1 and how I'm not rating them highly. With that, I think EDG has a much stronger chance to win. I think winning Worlds, I had them at 7%. So I don't have a ton of I think they're going to win, or I don't have this strong belief that they're going to be a very powerful team. They obviously have a ton of talent, and I'll never bet against if they won Worlds, I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had them as a 5th ranked team and kind of the first team with a realistic chance that if they won Worlds, I'd be oh, that makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised.
The former world champions winning Worlds again. Yes, I think that most of us can agree they have a chance.
I know it's a hot take, try and contain yourself, but yeah, very, very strong conviction that EDG is actually a good team of League of Legends.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say I think that EDG was pretty fortunate last year in terms of the meta draw that they got. I don't expect them to repeat. I would probably I want to actively bet against them throughout this tournament. So I think that during the group stage, I want to bet against them in individual games because those obviously have super high variance and also play into the narrative that would force this to fail. I think that Scout up against Faker, Scout up against Jensen, I don't think that these large advantages are going to be created during the laning phase. I think that it would really require them to play a different style of league than they generally do, which it's possible that they do that, but teams really don't end up doing that. So instead of going to your 4th team, I kind of wanted to give my take on Damwon. I think that we've gone, and they would probably be my 5th or 4th favorite team at the tournament. I think that again, the gauntlet style of playoffs in the LCK kind of forces us to have a lower opinion of these teams because it seems like they go out so much earlier. But Damwon's roster is just kind of very good.
Yeah.
Nuguri is it's funny because I think somebody was trying to make the point to me the other day that Nuguri is a hard carry top laner. I've always kind of resisted that idea because he's most impactful when he's on a flanking teleport champion. When he was on Kennen all the time, that's really when he kind of shined the brightest. And I think that it's going to be pretty easy for him to play these like scaling top laners into the competition that he's up against throughout the play-in stage, and then or not the play-in stage, in the group stage. Like if you have Broken Blade against Nuguri, Nuguri's better. And then if you have Nuguri against 369, and this is a hot take, Nuguri's a better player than 369. We've gone on this like insane like we've gone on an insane journey with 369 where he was always pretty good but not great. Then he was scapegoated for Top Esports being bad last split and at the end of last year. And then now people are saying he's like the best top laner in the world. Like that blows my mind. Like last year going into Worlds, nobody would have said that about 369 versus Nuguri, like that 369 should be the better side of that matchup. But now that's the reality we find ourselves in. So I think that's a spot that you can kind of attack. In the jungle, I think that Canyon is, again, one of the best 2 or 3 junglers at the tournament. There's a very specific style that I kind of like in the jungle. So players like Kanavi, players like Canyon, that ability to completely take over a game and be the focal point of your team is pretty unique compared to most other players. Inspired does have that kind of range of outcomes to him, and younger Peanut did as well. But now Peanut really isn't that guy. Like the rest of his team is so strong that he doesn't need to be the one kind of putting the team on his back. The thing with this type of player, though, is that the games are extremely like dominant. When they're winning hard. When they're losing, they look like the worst jungler in the world, and that forces people to kind of like make a decision: do I think this person's actually good or actually bad? And like you'll listen to all the like analysts and YouTubers talk about Kanavi being like a potential Inter. It's like sometimes that's the best way to play League of Legends, and that is just generally lost upon the League community. I think that watches pro. Showmaker, out of his mind, one of the best. For sure, I think he's one of the 3 or 4 best mid laners in the world. It's just that his team hasn't been performing at a high level this split. They had a bunch of crazy shit going on in the spring, and then they're playing catch up for the entirety of summer, and now they're at Worlds and they qualified for Worlds. Like they're still Dom 1. They won 2 years ago. Like we can't forget about that. And they were in finals last year. Like they were I think they were 1 game away from going back to back, and then they upgraded their bot lane. I think Beryl is better than Kellen, but Deokdam is so much better than Ghost. The reason why Nongshim failed so hard this year is because Ghost was bad. Ghost was carried so hard by Damwon for the most part. And he did show that like in the hard carry meta, I think in the spring, he did have some life where there were a few games where his like Jinx or Aphelios was really strong. But when he was on Damwon and they were so strong, he was more of a utility player and kind of feeding the rest of his team. So that's really where I think one of the biggest edges are in this tournament is with Damwon. I love Damwon. So that's my thoughts on Damwon. Do you have anything you want to say about them, or would you like to go to your 4th team?
I'll just give a brief bit on Damwon. Like clearly they have world championship ceiling. I don't think anyone will argue with that. Like all of these guys, a year ago, 2 years ago, every single one was like, this guy's the best player in the world at this position, and that's fine. There is like a quote from Moneyball where Billy Bean is talking to his scouts, and the scouts are trying to convince him like this guy's a great player, and he's like, oh, this guy's a good hitter, Billy. You got to give him a chance. Like, well, if he's a good hitter, why doesn't he hit good? And it's like, if the M1 players, if these are great players, then why don't they play great? At the end of the day, like they got 3rd in LCK, not a bad result, but like you can only deal with what's in front of you, right? And that's that they have been disappointing this whole year. So I would not be shocked, but I don't think I think it's very, very unlikely that they just turn back the clock. They figure everything out and they're like, yep, we're back to best team in the world, Dom 1. But I've been wrong so many times in my life. What's one more,
And I think a big part of that is that they didn't have Nuguri for a lot of the spring and summer. I think that Birdall was like constantly moving in and out of the roster. I think that at this tournament, it's more likely we just see Nuguri full time. But let's go to your number 4 team. So who is your 4th favorite team at Worlds?
Sure. Number 4, I have Gen G, which I think is going to probably be the hottest take, that they're the 4th strongest team. I think a lot of people have these guys as tournament favorites. They're the strongest team from the LCK by far. And I have them kind of comparable in strength to RNG as kind of like this very, very good, very real shot of winning Worlds. Maybe like 15% of the time they win Worlds. But that is much lower than the books are offering, and so I'm just totally off them. But this again reminds me a ton of like the year Damwon won, where they were just like so much better than everyone else in Korea that like it kind of broke the my modeling process in terms of like I have to adjust for like region and like first place teams and regions generally perform better than like their international counterparts, and so MSI is a good example of that. Like you have all of the best teams in the region, well they're going to perform better compared to like their international counterparts historically, because you're going to include like the second and third and fourth place teams from Worlds. And so I might be underrating Genji, but I don't have them as like I don't have them as a top 3 team or top 2 team or even the best team. Like I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. I think that if Genji didn't win this split so convincingly, it might sound crazy, but like if they didn't win this split so convincingly, they wouldn't even be thought of as having an outside chance to win Worlds. Like even if they came in second this split, like if they had the same record as T1 or Damwon and went through the playoffs and like ended up coming in second, nobody would take them seriously as a team with an actual chance to win Worlds. So I think it's kind of interesting that we're getting kind of the inverse of last year. Last year, I had Genji as a top 3 or 4 team when everybody else kind of thought they were just like not good enough to compete with the better teams. But the meta kind of pushed me in that direction where I thought this team has a realistic chance because Ruler is such a god. This year, it's kind of the opposite. Everybody has them a little, I think, slightly overrated. I think that the way that you attack this team is by attacking Doran, who, yes, he's looked very good this split. Why has he looked very good this split? Because his team hasn't lost. If you put them up against like JDG in a best of 5, and Kanavi decides, okay, we're going to play through top lane, draft 369 into a good champion matchup. I'll take a good champion matchup against Peanut, and we'll just continuously pressure that side of the map. Then they have really good winning chances. And that's kind of how you have to approach League against these very good teams, because even if you put like Chovy really far behind or Ruler really far behind, they're still insane mechanical players. I don't think Doran's really that level of player. And then the jungle in general is just so sensitive to like big like gold deficits, where if you have a player like Kanavi just continuously invading because he has a strong champion matchup against Peanut, like we've seen Peanut lose hard in bad matchups before because he's willing to play that high volatility style. So I'm definitely trying to go against Genji as well. I really do like Damwon and like DRX as like top LCK teams, because I think there might actually be some value there that I don't think that the stats would really be borne out by the stats. So it's coming more from a talent evaluation perspective and like playstyle perspective. Because Genji is a very like front to back team fighting team. They're going to build up a pretty steady advantage throughout the entire game, and then you're going to have to beat them in a team fight around the 25 to 35 minute mark, and the chances of doing that while behind in gold are low. So unless you like just mega brain them in draft, you're probably not going to have a good chance to win. So I agree with you on Genji in terms of like your read on them maybe being slightly overrated, and I will want to actively bet against them in the group stage and definitely the knockout stage, because I assume they will make it into the knockout stage.
Yeah, I think they kind of got the toughest group, assuming RNG makes it out in first in their play-ins, just because they're going to get RNG in their group, who is another very, very capable team. So there's like a decent percentage of the time that they end up second in their group and have to play one of top JDG in the quarterfinals, which is just like unlucky.
Yeah.
So like I don't think this is like, again, this is not a bad team. This is a top, I have the 4th in the world, right?
Yeah.
like I'm not saying these guys are bad, but I'm just saying like I'm not on board with how highly the books are rating them, and I guess how highly the public rates them as a top LCK team. But I have seen this run against me before, where like a very, very good, like a totally dominant LCK team just like outperforms their metrics because they're just that much better than their region. But yeah, with you, let's hope Genji loses.
Yeah. Okay, so your number 3 team is RNG.
I have RNG.
I've already kind of given my thoughts on RNG. We've talked about RNG a decent amount in this video. Is there anything else you wanted to say about RNG?
Yeah, one final thing. There's another quirky prop being offered. So playing team like there's two separate markets of like, do you think RNG is going to win at plus
650.
650?
Yeah.
And then there's play-in team to win at plus 700. So RNG is a play-in team. Um, so don't be an idiot and take the play-in team to win at plus 700 because then those teams really don't have like that much of a chance to win, but you're getting an extra 1 to 2% in equity along with an extra 50 cents on the line. So if you want to bet play-in team to win, that's a much better bet than RNG to win at a worse price.
Yeah, for sure. And just to reiterate that, because the way that you said it was a little bit confusing, is you said don't be an idiot, bet the plus seven. Don't be an idiot, bet the plus 700. Like we're saying, bet the plus 700. Don't bet on RNG to win at plus 650. Bet on the play-in team to win because you get better odds. That's what we're saying, and that's probably the best bet out. It's the second best bet out there. I think the plus 550 for RNG to be the top LPL team is even better than that bet because they can get to like semifinals and there's a world out there where none of the LCK or none of the other LPL teams make it to the semifinals. I think I'd still lean that way, but that's fine. All right, second team, who do you got?
Yeah, I got JDG as the second team. So I have them as the strongest team in the tournament. Like I think they're a better team than top, but just the way the groups have worked out, I have JDG as the second most likely to win Worlds. That's kind of just I could be off by a percentage. They're separate from top esports by I have 1.5% difference in likelihood to win Worlds. But I mean, the Chinese champions, like, how could they not be one of the top two teams to win Worlds in terms of like everyone's output or modeling? So I don't know if there's like a ton of explanation. Just like clearly a very strong team. I had them as the best team in the world after their playoff run. Of course, I'm going to think they're going to win Worlds very often.
Yeah, I hate how like hyped up JDG is getting. I'm not saying that you're hyping them up specifically, but like it's so funny because all the people who like make content for the different regions out there and like focus on the LEC and LCS, they like talk about their teams being so good all year, and then they get to Worlds and they're like, oh well, JDG is like the best team in the world. It's like you haven't talked about them for probably 5 or 6 months, and now we get there, and now you're talking about it as if it's the most obvious thing in the world that this team is so good, when in reality, during the middle of spring, when JDG was like losing to shitty teams, they were probably saying, oh man, that JDG team is not very good, like on the off chance that they looked at the standings, and they'd give some like horrible take just talking about the LPL. That's when I'm always like, I think JDG is so good. I've been talking about JDG for like a 1.5 years, 2 years, and like they barely miss making it to Worlds, or they barely miss like doing really well in the playoffs, and it's like the results never kind of caught up. And then of course the one time I don't bet on them to win the split, they win the split. Like it's just super unlucky. Feels bad, man. Kanavi is out of his mind. Going from like the 369. I just want to talk about top esports and JDG kind of against one another right now. So if we look at Wayward against 369, I think both of them are very overrated at this point from a talent perspective. Neither player is like a mechanical god who does unbelievable things. That's just the kind of top laner that I prefer. I think a player like Breathe would just, if they were on even teams and the game came down to like Breathe against 369 or Breathe against Wayward every single game, I think that Breathe will win more often. Kanavi against Tian, moving into the jungle. Kanavi's a better jungler than Tian. Tian was like exiled from his team, and he's a former world champion. Like he was obviously the problem last split with FPX. He has these like levels of play where he's just playing like garbage. That happens, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have world championship winning upside. He obviously does. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets into the semifinals or finals or even wins a world championship with top esports. But if top esports wins a world championship, you know why it's going to be? It's going to be because Knight is so much better than most of the other mid laners that are at this tournament. Yagao, I was looking at like Cagel's video or something like that, and he had Yagao as one of the top mid laners in the world. Yagao is bad. Yagao is like an average at best mid laner in the LPL. There are so many mid laners that just dumpster him, and we got into a spot I think during the summer split and summer playoffs where Yagao's champions were just like miraculously good again, and that's part of the reason why they were so good during that run. Hope is a player who was on Top Esports at one point. I've always kind of been like tempered expectations with Jackie Love. I think that his upside is so high because he's willing to look like an asshole and like just lose his team games in general. Like he's willing to do that because it's kind of cool. But like Hope and Missing against Jackie Love and Mark, people were saying that Mark is one of the best supports in the world. Like, what are we talking about? Mark was who was Mark on like a split ago or 2 splits ago?
LGD and
he was
DMO
horrible.
before that. Yeah.
And he was horrible. People were saying he was horrible because their teams weren't winning. And then right when they get put onto a team with better talent and they start winning, now they're one of the best supports in the world. Do you think that like this just happens like out of nowhere? Like I hate that so much. How like talent evaluations flip so hard on these players because they went to a good team. If you put Mark on FlyQuest, guess who sucks again? Mark. That's the point.
So it's fun. Like DMO must have like traumatized you in the past because that Mark Gala bot lane was really really funny to watch. Like 3 or 4 years ago when they were both on DMO together, and you must have both disliked those guys. And it's so funny. You know, after spring 2022, I did kind of like a recap of like who did I bet on the most, who did I win the most money betting on, just like as a team. And JDG in spring was my number one team. Like I won like almost 20 units, just like. I also like my model also recognized this is a strong team. They're good. Let's just bet on them. And I'm with you. Like I don't really know what the analysts say or like talking heads say. Obviously a lot of them just don't watch the LPL. In the same way that like I don't watch the PCS or the VCS. I don't watch the LCK or the split. So like who am I to talk? But clearly this is like an elite team. I remember Yagao being kind of just like above average mid laner, and Mark, I think on that LGD team he was fine. He's fine here. I think Hope is just like a baller. Kanavi is just a baller.
Yeah.
These top 369 is a baller. Like they have like a few guys here that Hope doesn't really get respected as like always the best AD, but like he's a beast, man. Like he will show some people what's up. Like if like Gala fans will watch Hope and be like, now that's what they think. Hope is what Gala fans think Gala is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else you can say about this team other than like very, very good, probably the best in the world. If you give me some good odds to bet on them to win, like let's run it.
That's why I think it's going to come crumbling down so hard. I think that when we look back on the pre-tournament odds, I think we're going to feel silly about Damwon, RNG. Like in my last video I made about this, I was like, really, you probably just want to bet on RNG and Damwon. And then I thought to myself, wait a second, I don't really want those teams to win. Like if I had it my way, EG would win or DRX would win.
Yeah.
But, like that's just most likely not going to happen. I think that a North American team has a better chance of performing well than they have in years past. Part of that is because I do think that there is a slight advantage to being in North America. We've seen that in different tournaments where the difference between like the LPL and the LCK was that they were in the host region, or that's it's a contributing factor. It's not like a huge difference. But then LEC, we saw the LEC kind of outperform when the World Championship was there as well. So I think that like I said, I think RNG, Damwon, and DRX are definitely the 3 teams that I'm the most interested in because they are, teams from very good regions who didn't perform as well as they normally do, have long-term talent on their rosters, and they're just kind of being like undervalued in general, like from a talent perspective. I think that's basically it.
Yeah, I could go over Top Esports to win. Top Esports is a good team. They've floundered at international events randomly. Maybe there's some signal in that noise, but I'll lose money again. Who cares? But yeah, I think like my highest investments on RNG, and then just like even though I think they're weak, Genji to be the best team at LCK at -110, kind of too good to pass up. Rogue to get the farthest, also pretty good. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that we should have a bet against one another. You get to pick one of the top 5 teams, or you can pick whatever team you want. Okay. But I get 2 picks that are less than 10%.
To make it the farthest
to win
to win.
Worlds.
Well, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that I just pick my favorite team, which is Top Esports, to win.
All right, you got Top Esports. Okay, I didn't catch what you said before, but yes, Top Esports, and we'll just do whoever goes furthest. I'll take. Well, do you think that's fair or no?
Yeah, I have Top Esports more than 20% to win. So if you want two teams under 10%, you got it.
All right, I'll take. What do you have RNG at? What's the number?
18.4.
Oh man, you do have a huge edge over the book line. I'll take Damwon and DRX. That doesn't bother me. I think that they both have pretty good chances to get far in the knockout stage. Just because the LCK is perennially underrated, I really do think that their playoff style kind of contributes to that. I am somewhat sad that Sandbox didn't make it. I think like by the end of the split, I became such a huge Prince fan that I hope he leaves Sandbox and goes to a team that I don't have to remember that Yamato Cannon used to be the head coach. All right. But that's it. We'll figure out a bet. We'll figure out some kind of thing that we have to do in a video in the future. Something embarrassing. But that's basically it. We hit an hour. That was a pretty fast hour. I feel like we moved pretty quick. Anything you'd like to say before we end the video?
No, I think it's a good hour. I'll shameless plug. Follow me at Jskelts on Twitter if you like betting on League of Legends. You can make fun of me for losing money when all these bets brick, but other than that, I'm good.
Nice. All right, and then obviously comment, subscribe in the comment section. It's unlikely that you've made it this far, but I know I have some very dedicated people out there. Please make a comment with who you think will actually win Worlds, your favorite bets, things like that. And then we'll be making another video probably in the next couple of days about the first few days of individual matches. And we'll go from there. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.